everyone. I'd like you to join me in welcoming Opal Symes.
Thank you. I'm going to be talking about collecting information with care. And so that's my Twitter handle. And if you want the slides or any links from the slides, I've put them up on my website, so you don't have to frantically type them. We as technologists build systems that people interact with every day, and a lot of the time we go into building those systems without checking our assumptions and making sure that checking our assumptions about them, and without questioning whether those assumptions are valid. So today I'm going to walk through some examples and challenge some of those assumptions and try and show you ways that you can build these systems better. And in the end, I hope you will have at least some awareness of the sorts of assumptions that we all hold and how you can challenge them. So that being said, it's important to be aware that I have assumptions as well, and that if your piece of technology needs to be culturally sensitive, especially around areas of indigenous status or race, I am definitely not the sort of person who is qualified to be talking about that. You should go and find some people who have lived experience in that area and talk to them and preferably pay them and look after them. And if you're a company, you should definitely look at hiring those sorts of people and hiring them early and giving them the support that they need in your company. So a little bit about myself. I'm a developer and an operations scientist working at a small data platform startup in Wellington. I write mostly Elixir, JavaScript, and Terraform. And at home, I write mostly Python and Rust. It's been a really interesting experience building the sort of extensible data platform and trying to build it in a way that encourages companies to use it well, whilst also allowing companies to use it how they would want to use it. But that being said, this talk's not endorsed by them, and I'm here in my own capacity. I'm also a transgender woman, and I will happily say that coming out gets easier every time, but it's never that easy. It's always a game of chance, and in situations like this where I'm out in my bio and it's kind of semi-public knowledge, it's easy, but in other situations it's a matter of weighing up whether coming out is going to put me at risk or if coming out is even necessary. And figuring out what sort of questions people are actually asking when they're asking, what is your gender? And so that kind of is what led me to give my talk at PyCon last year, and this one as well. But I'm going to go into that in a little bit later on in the talk. So a bit of an outline. We're going to be talking about names because they're relatively easy, apparently. And then we'll go on to the slightly more complicated emails, and then we'll go on to the fun that is gender. And finally, we're going to talk about what you need to think about when you're changing that sort of information and deleting it. So let's begin. Names. You'd think that something that we all kind of interact with every day would be relatively well understood, but there's a lot that can go wrong. So we're going to start off with this really simple form. We're going to say first name and last name, and then when we kind of use that, we're going to just concatenate them together. And this works really well for people with Western names, but it has some flaws. Oh, sorry, I've got to talk about the other bit. The other thing with this particular form is that those two fields are required. And if you were to be someone who doesn't have a first name or doesn't have a last name, you cannot use this form, which means you cannot use the service, which means you cannot buy the things or whatever you're trying to do. And so the first thing we need to do is we need to actually make it so that people can use this form who don't have a first name or don't have a last name. And so what we can do is we can basically say, look, as long as you put something in one of the two fields, we'll accept it, but we'll kind of lead people to putting their full name in. And so that's all really good. But now we need to tackle the next problem, which is what people actually enter. And so I found this on Twitter, and I don't really know how to break it, but that's a really horrible message to be told that your name is wrong. And it's almost certainly because of the accent above the I. And so we definitely need to talk about the elephant in the room, which is Unicode. Sorry, that joke was just too good not to include. So Unicode aims to be able to store all of the characters for all of the languages in the world, past, present, and future. So there's Egyptian hieroglyphics, you've got things like Cyrillic and Greek, you've got the pictograph Chinese character set, and this is all really good, but the thing that's really made people take notice of Unicode support has been emoji. Right? Like, this means that even people with the privilege of having an ASCII encodable name have to care about whether their systems are mangling Unicode. And there are a few gotchas, and I'm just going to scratch the very surface because this could be an entire talk in itself. There's a lot of things online about just print and emails completely messing up names. So we need to obviously store that somewhere, and this has kind of been where I've experienced problems, which is some databases don't actually support the full Unicode range. They only support part of the Unicode range, and specifically the MySQL and MariaDB database variants. That's where I've had problems. I'm pretty sure there are other databases with other problems as well. But the problem is basically getting the emoji, for want of a better word, into the database. And so one of the things that you need to think about is, if you're going to get it into, say, a MySQL database, is what is the character encoding of that database. In 2004, they added Unicode support, which was really not Unicode, but it kind of was Unicode. It only supports the first 3-byte variant of Unicode, and to use a phrase, it was widely regarded as a bad idea. But it covered most of the modern languages, so it was okay. And then they added the proper Unicode support in 2010, and they have just switched over to using it by default in MySQL 8. But if you're using MariaDB, it's different because MariaDB reasons, and there's a, I don't understand. There's probably some history that I didn't particularly want to look into because this isn't a talk about Unicode support in databases. But they basically chose to use Lang1 as the default encoding, which is really unusual given that we're in the second century of the 21st century. We're in the 21st century. And then if you're using it on Debian, it's different again because Debian does packaging stuff differently. So if you've managed to create a database that doesn't use the UTF-8 MV4, the right one, you basically need to change everything all the way down. And this was a nightmare when I did it. Basically, you have to change every single text column, every single table, every single database that you're using to the new character encoding. You also need to watch out that you also need to change the defaults so that your new columns will get that as well. Otherwise, you're basically creating the same problem, but a little bit later. And you also need to change connection options so that you're not going to get those Unicode characters lost in the transfer. Yeah, it was a mess. The project I worked on previously, we found this bug by having someone try to log into our system and it crashing. So that was a rude awakening. We're through the Unicode part. Okay, so we've survived. So we've made this form. It looks really cool. We've managed to get, we're storing this stuff vaguely well, and we've made sure we can put Unicode characters in there. Fantastic. But we need to talk about what happens when this form is encountered by people who have, with other cultures. From other cultures. So specifically, I'm going to talk about Chinese names, because there's a great document from the W3C. There's a link up the very top. Basically, it goes into everything you could possibly want to know about names and how different cultures treat them differently and all this sort of fun stuff. It's a really interesting read if you're dealing with names. It's kind of been the basis for a lot of this section here. So this name is, we're going to look at someone called Mao Zitan. But unlike English, where the first name is the given name, the first character is the surname, and the middle character is the generational name, and then the last character is their given name. So in this case, Mao is the family name, and Tan is the given name. And so this kind of works okay with our form right now, but if we were to, say, change the way that we rendered this to only use the first name, we'd end up with something like this, which is basically the equivalent of saying "Dear Symes." And it's not particularly nice, and so we can make this better. Sorry. So yeah. So we know that names are wide and varied, and the thing is, the first kind of word of someone's name isn't necessarily the actual given name. And the other thing is that they can also be really long. We need to think about this when we design our databases. Using a varchar field with a length of, say, 63 is probably not going to fit everyone's name in. And so if you can't fit someone's name in, then they're not going to be able to use your thing. Using big fields is really good. And so the thing that's recommended by the W3C and myself, because that's what they recommended, is to just do away with the whole splitting of the name. Basically what you're doing is you're telling a human to split up their name, and then we're rejoining it later on without any awareness of the culture and stuff. So instead of asking the user to split it up, we can just say, look, just give us your full name, and we'll use that in letters and stuff. And then give us a greeting, and we'll use that in emails, or when you log into the website, we'll say, "Hi, Opal." And this is really good, because what it also allows you to do is, in situations like myself, where my legal name is different to my name, I can put my legal name in my full name field and use the greeting as my actual name, and thus I can sort of slowly rotate out my name like a password. Oh, I haven't thought of it like that. Have you changed your name recently? I wouldn't recommend it. It's not fun. But being able to do something like this and not seeing your dead name except in certain situations where you kind of have to is really great for people like me as a transgender person, but also as just in general. You know what timing I'm doing. So in summary, use a full name. Don't try and get the user to split it and then rejoin it. And if you don't want someone's full name, you just want them to use a greeting or their given name, just ask for that instead. Use Unicode all the way down. And make sure that you test that your Unicode works. I found that using emoji for this is really great because you can look at it and go, yes, that's definitely the emoji I typed in and not Moji Bake. Whereas, well, for someone like me who can't read Chinese characters or some of the other characters, yeah, it works really well. And don't put length limits into names. You're going to basically exclude some people. So with that, we've kind of gotten over the complicated bit, right? So we're going to talk about emails, and I figured we'd start with a little bit of fun. And guess which one of these is actually not a valid email address according to the latest RFC, the latest RFCs. So who here thinks the first one's not valid? Second one? Third one? Fourth one? Awesome. Everyone who put their hand up is wrong. It turns out they're all valid. So one of the latest RFCs lets you put non-ASCII characters in your email address. The parentheses are actually comments, and you are allowed to put them in, but they might not be supported and this sort of fun stuff. But they're technically in the RFC, so technically they are valid. Quotes lets you put spaces and other quotes and backslashes in, and also lets you do multiple dots, which is nice. And then the final one is just an email address that I kind of want websites to accept, but they just don't. But that being said, the first three don't get accepted by my email provider. Like, I tried sending an email to each one of them, and it didn't let me send it with the first one, didn't let me send it with the second one, and the third one is currently trying to be sent. Like, I got an email that said that it's retrying, and so because this is sending it to myself, so in theory, if it's managed to go out, it should come back in, but I don't understand. So at the end of the day, the RFCs are great, but if you can't send the email, then there's no point like allowing it in. So in theory, right, the correct fix for this is to not allow me to put quotes and spaces and lots of dots in my email address, because you're not going to be able to send them, and you're not going to, yeah. So, yeah, emails are hard, surprisingly. The number of websites that just don't let me put my vanity domain name in as my domain name is really frustrating. And the number of websites who reject pluses is, please, don't. Please. So, at the end of the day, you kind of want to validate that it looks a bit like an email address. Like, does it have an @ symbol in it? Another thing that I've seen is the idea that if it's similar to an email provider's email address, like someone's typed Gmail instead of Gmail, you could put something in there that's like, hey, look, we're not going to stop you from submitting this, but you might want to just double check that you've typed in your domain name right, and you're not trying to sell nails that are shaped like a G. The final thing you need to make sure is it going to actually get sent, right? You can't really check whether it's going to be received correctly, more on that in a moment, but you'll know what software you're using to send it, and you can check whether you can actually send an email with, for example, quotes, dots, and spaces in it. So there's that. And then if you want to get really, really fancy, you can do things like look for an MX record. And you can ask the SMTP server, does this username actually exist? But in my opinion, that's a bit overkill, because if someone's gone to the trouble of putting in, well, it's a lot of overkill for basically what your mail server is going to tell you when it comes back with an invalid username, like mail delivery failure. So, but if you want to do this, there are definitely libraries out there that can do this. There's a couple in Python. I haven't really checked very many other places, but it seems to be a vaguely normal thing to do. So, yeah, so with emails, you basically want to try and catch as many of those common errors as possible. And you probably shouldn't rule your own checking unless you are checking that it's going to be accepted by your own sending. Like, you're not trying to check that, oh, Gmail doesn't let me put cedillas under my, or accents above my E's, and therefore I'm not going to let you send that. But if my mail server lets me send it, then I should just let it send and let the other side deal with returning it if it's wrong. But failing that, like, use libraries that will help you out with this. So, how are we doing for time? 20 minutes. Oh, that's not too bad. Sorry, I'm worried that I'm talking too fast. So, we're over halfway through, I think. I didn't actually properly time where the stops are, but we'll say we're halfway through. So we're going to talk about the hard stuff that is gender. But first, a couple of definitions. So transgender is someone who is transgender has a gender that is different from the one that they were assigned at birth. And cisgender is someone who has the same gender as the one that they were assigned at birth. And yes, you're assigned gender at birth. It's a useful term to differentiate between people who are transgender and people who are not. It's not, as some people seem to suggest, like a bad word, cisgender. So, and then non-binary people are people who aren't either male or female exclusively. So you can be kind of part male, part female, that's a really bad way of phrasing it. Like a demi-boy is someone who is kind of in the, not a boy, but sort of. I'm doing an absolutely horrifying job of explaining this. But at the end of the day, there is more than two genders. And this is really important when you're trying to design a gender field because you need to have more than two options. And so when we get to something like this, I wince, because what you're basically saying is, oh, everyone who's non-binary is either going to have to just pick one and be happy with it or not use this. And it's a really annoying form. It would always be like, what is your favorite color? Pink or purple? You like green? I'm sorry, you're just going to have to pick one of these. If you don't like it, maybe we can look at it in next print. And so one of the ways you can kind of avoid this is to go with something like adding a non-binary option. And this is okay. Some people don't particularly like it because it's kind of like the other. Be like, what is your favorite color? Pink, purple, other. And it's like, oh, well, maybe that's not the best way of doing it. And so an alternative to doing this is to just get people to type it in. So they can type in as much or as little information as they want. So you will all have seen one of these because it was on the registration for the conference. Personally, I put transgender woman in because it's an important part of my identity and I feel safe talking about it here. If it was a different situation, I might just put woman. And it gives you the ability to say as much or as little as you want about your gender, for example. So, another alternative is to look at something like the open demographics. Nikki Stevens has done an amazing bit of work about collecting demographic information And it's quite a complicated form because it's trying to capture all of these identities in a way that you can look at them and count them. So there's basically, do you consider yourself transgender? Do you consider yourself gender non-conforming, gender diverse, gender queer, these sorts of things? Are you intersex? And where do you identify? And the important thing here is that there's a couple of extra ones. So there's a prefer not to answer, and there's also a self-identify to basically capture the things that they haven't. So this is really good if you're trying to actually capture what makes up your community. But if you're actually, it's really good to try and capture demographic information down to the identity level. But if you're trying to just capture, say, what your community's minority, how many people in your community identify as a minority, then maybe an alternative way of doing this is to ask something like Drupal.org asks, which is, do you identify as any one of these minorities? And I personally think this is really good because it's not, you don't have to think about a lot of the questions about, well, you don't have to think about how to ask gender, race, age, ethnicity well. And you're also giving people the opportunity to self-identify without you having to decide, oh, is a trans man part of the gender minority or the gender identity minority? It lets people say, I am part of this minority without you making that decision for them. It's based off of a category called the Big Eight. I haven't put links to that, but I will put them up when I finish. So maybe instead of asking about someone's gender, what you're actually after is, how do I refer to you in the third person? And so the thing with it is that gender doesn't imply a particular set of pronouns. And so we have to ask this as a separate question, and we can ask this really simply as, what pronouns should we use to refer to you as? We say she, they, and he. Obviously, she being predominantly feminine set of pronouns, they being kind of a gender-neutral one, and he being masculine. But that's not saying that people who use he are masculine, just kind of predominant ones. But the problem you're going to run into with this, especially if you are trying to do a set of translations, is that some languages, French I know is one of them, lack a gender-neutral pronoun. And so people who use they as a pronoun are not going to get the translation that they want, which is a gender-neutral pronoun, in languages that don't have them. And so one of the things you could think about doing is either asking people, in languages that don't have this, what would you like us to refer to you as? Or try and change the wording so that you don't need to use it. Other languages will lack gendered pronouns, and this is just fine. The problem lies in going from, say, they into a gendered pronoun rather than from a gendered pronoun into they. But basically, wherever you're unsure, just kind of stick to the gender-neutral ones, so they in English. If you aren't translating it, though, and you're just dealing with English nice and simple, one thing you could look at is something like Pronoun Island, which is an amazing website, basically pronoun.is. And it lists a whole heap of pronouns that people use and gives you examples of how to use them. It's an open source project, and it's got a data set on GitHub that you could potentially pull into your application and use as a data set of pronouns. It also has a particular URL scheme, so you could look at taking a URL of say this she, her pronoun page and converting that into a set of pronouns that you then store in the database. Cool. Kind of race through that. So titles, and if you are sensing a theme here, Gender does not imply what title you use. And what title you use does not imply what your gender is. And so when you're creating a form that asks for someone's title, you should probably include none. But if you're picking none, don't actually type out none when you're sending it out. So just a word of warning here. You should also definitely include MX. It's kind of the gender neutral one. And then you've obviously got the standard ones of, I don't actually know how to pronounce them, but I always pick the wrong one. So yeah, alternatively, you could let people type their own. Or if you wanted to be really nice, you could just drop the entire thing entirely and not bother with it, because it's kind of, it's getting on. Like, it just seems a bit archaic, right? Like, so, yeah. So finally, I wanted to talk about clothing preferences. And you're probably going to see a theme here. It doesn't actually imply your clothing preferences. And so one of the things that you want to do when you're sort of building this is lists, instead of asking, do you want to see women's clothing or men's clothing, maybe just ask what categories people are interested in. And, you know, if someone wants to rock a set of high heels, a ball gown, and a suit, then they should totally be able to do that. And so, whoa, doing good for time, I think. Here we go. So, the final thing I wanted to talk about was this idea that you kind of are forced into a gender binary by rules and regulations, and specifically in Australia, there's this lovely act called the Workplace Gender Equality Act, and it's basically a government agency that is there to figure out if Australia's workplaces are getting close to gender equality. And one of the things that the Act does is it defines gender as either male or female. And as we learned earlier, that's not true. But that's not getting in their way. So it basically will require a company above a certain size to report the gender composition of their workforce. And so when you're counting this stuff up, you basically ask, are you male or female? And if you are neither of them, then you don't get counted. And this is probably not ideal. But also, it's not ideal to be like, oh, you look like a man today, I'm going to put down man. And so one of the things that you could do is ask the direct question of, what gender do you want us to record you as for the purposes of this report, that it requires us to report a binary? And making sure that you mention that this is absolutely not the fault of you, the form maker, but instead it's like the Act has said that we have to do this. I'm really sorry, but it's really a terrible situation, but we can't do anything about that. And giving people the opportunity to say, look, I'm non-binary, but I want to be recorded as female. If you're worried about people abusing this form, you could possibly gate, or if you want to find out demographics beyond what you need to report for the Act, you could potentially gate it behind a what is your gender question. And if you pick the non-binary, neither male or female, then you pop open this second bit, which says, for the purposes of the report, what would you like us to put you down as? And this way, you avoid people like abusing the form, but you also let people who you can't include immediately have the option to be included. So, yeah. And then one final thing, because it just really annoys me, is passports. I fly often enough that I know that none of the flights that do the trans-Tasman, none of the airlines that do the trans-Tasman route get this right. But there are 3, maybe 4 genders on a passport. You can have M, F, and X, so male, female, and other. And the 4th option is one that was being discussed in the UK a little while ago, which was basically removing gender entirely from the passport, because, to be honest, what extra information does it give you beyond the photo, your name, and a whole heap of other things that are kind of embedded in the passport? So it's kind of redundant. And so maybe you'll need to add a 4th option that's like, I don't have a gender on my passport. And if you're wondering, the actual e-passport documentation is I would say interesting read, but it was interesting for me to read. And basically it talks about how it actually stores this information, and as part of the spec, it talks about how they actually store this, and there are 4 options for what your gender is in the e-passport section. Which is male, female, other, and then I can't remember exactly, but it's kind of unknown, undefined, kind of thing. So, yeah. So in summary, gender is definitely not a binary, and do not try and use a binary to capture it. And it's not a replacement for asking other questions. So, what preferences do you have, and what preferences do you have, what pronouns do you want to use, what titles do you want us to use? And if you absolutely have to capture a binary, you should explain it, and you should potentially give people the option to not answer that question. And in case you're wondering if this is all just a bit too much, then you could look at something like this, but don't. Okay, so these are basically APIs that you send some amount of information you've collected to, and they give you back a gender. And this is, I've not actually looked into it particularly much, because I got to this and thought, I actually don't want to go down this rabbit hole because it seems like a terrible idea. The thing with it is that it's trying to establish a gender out of things that aren't your gender. And it's just a really shitty way of doing it. Like, you could just ask someone's gender, or don't. Like, yeah, don't. Just don't. It'd save you a lot of hassle. So finally, we get to talk about data retention. I'm not a lawyer. I don't really know very much about data retention, like laws, like GDPR and the Californian Consumer Privacy Act. So I take this with a grain of salt, but kind of also, some of this stuff's from experience, from trying to change things that have not been easy. So as a summary of what I'm trying to talk about is basically make it easy. And if you can't make it easy, give people the option to kind of work around that. So one good example is this is a rewards program that I'm part of, and it's got my dead name on it because it's also got a credit card, and so it needs my legal name, but it's got this preferred name. And this will be used in things like basically in places where they don't have to use my legal name. This is really good. If you're going down the given name and greeting option, that's also a good option. So the thing that doesn't get really talked about is usernames. In my previous role, we were tackling this issue because when I joined, I was still using my dead name, and so all my computer logins or my website logins were with my old name. And so one of the things we were trying to do was, well, how do we tackle this? Because everything uses username as a key. And so if you want to change it, you've got to go into every single system and change your username. And then systems that link together need to change as well. And so what I'd recommend is thinking about, do you actually want to use a username as a linking mechanism, or do you want to use something else? And do you want to let people change their usernames? Well, how do you want to let people change their usernames? Because either people will be able to change their usernames, or they will just create a brand new account and ditch the old one. So one of the things we were tackling was using UUIDs, using IDs, using identifiers that aren't your username to be able to link people to their account, so that you can change the username and it just becomes like another attribute, like what sort of pie you like, or what's your height, and that sort of thing. So the other thing to think about is what actually happens to that old username when you change. So on GitHub, my old username is now 404, but you may want to create a new account that uses that old username to basically name squat, and so that someone else doesn't. And if you've got a lot of projects, then you're going to want to name squat your current project's names on your old username, because people will still be going to them. And so you need to. This is something that I don't think is particularly well thought through in a lot of systems, because even things like Twitter, GitHub, as I mentioned, let you change your username but don't really do anything with the old username, and so it kind of just disappears. Finally, changing emails is, I've recently done it, and I feel like there's not enough security behind it. It seems like you can change it really easily, and there's basically no kind of protection. And so the thing I'd think about is, are you going to let someone else access your account? If someone gets access to your account and they change their email address, are you able to recover that, or are you stuck forever because they've basically just taken over your entire account by changing their email address? Cool. So, and finally, deleting data. I don't really have anything particularly to talk about here. We all kind of know we want our data to be deleted at some point. And ideally, it'd be easy. Like, you'd think that it would, after making it really easy to sign up, they would make it easy to delete, but alas, no. The number of websites that I've basically changed my email address to whatever email address they wanted me to email to get my data deleted, and set my name to please delete me, only to have it revert, which was unfortunate, so I did it again. I think they got the message after a while. So, yeah. All right, conclusion, we're almost done. Home straight. Names. Use Unicode everywhere, and don't assume that someone's first name is their given name. Make changing them easy, and if you can't, use a preferred name where it's hard. I'll let people take photos and cool. So with emails, follow RFCs and make it so that whatever email you accept, you can send. Don't care about the other end, just make sure you can get it out of the door. And make it easy to change your email address, but try and secure that as well. And finally, gender. It's not a binary, and it doesn't dictate anything else about you. And if you're kind of reaching to ask the gender question, ask yourself if you want to ask a different question. If by asking the gender question, you're trying to ask a different question by proxy. Things like pronouns and titles are kind of the questions you might want to consider asking instead of what gender you are. And finally, data retention. Make it easy to update the information that's stored. Be aware of the risks around changing things. And make it easy to delete people's data. There are obviously a lot of things that I didn't get a chance to cover. Security, privacy, using hashing functions that are cryptographically secure to protect your passwords, encrypting stuff in flight and at rest, and also things like how to phrase your error messages so you don't get a message that says your name is wrong. So thank you very much. I probably have time for 1 or 2 questions, if people want. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Opal. Lovely talk. What happens if a person only has one name?
So, like, first name or?
Either. Well, they only have one name.
So, in the first name, last name situation, you could make it so that you don't require both of them. You could basically require at least one. And in the full name and greeting thing, you just put in the only name you have in both fields. So, the nice thing with using the full name or the greeting is that you don't have to worry about that. And people can just put whatever they want to put in. And you're not kind of dictating to the user what that entails. So, yeah. So,
Thanks. So you gave a lot of good advice for people who are making websites and asking questions. What advice would you have for me as a user when I'm trying to sign up for something and I get down and I see, and it says, what gender are you, male, female? And I'm like, oh, I hate this, I hate that this is here. It's not my problem right now. I want to sign, like, what should I do? Like,
I don't know. Sorry, it's not. Yeah, it's a hard one because.
I mean, like one option perhaps is I can I scroll to the bottom of the page. I try and find out who made the page, and I tell them.
Yeah.
Is there a resource I can point them at? The W3.org, did that have a section on gender or?
The W3 one has names. Gender, I don't have anything off the top of my head that I can say, like, you can just send them directly to here. But I will see if I can find some stuff, if that's helpful. Yep. Did we have time for one more, or?
We're unfortunately out of time,
okay,
but
fantastic.
I mean, if you're welcome to hang around,
Yeah,
I guess people are more than welcome to come up afterward. Just join me in thanking Opal for a great session.